Hello there, and welcome to Pleasure Activism, Eros, Beauty, and Sensuality in Times of Challenge. I am Darshana Avila. If we don't already know one another, I am so thrilled to be with you, even while we're here in the midst of a collective moment that is hard, y'all. And let me just begin there. The overwhelm, the grief, the rage, the feelings of freeze that we might be tracking in our own systems. This is a lot of what our day in and day out experience is spent navigating. Right? We go do what we got to get done. And then also there are these deep, deep feelings that perhaps we sink into in certain moments. And other times we might feel very far away from them, but want to connect. And it is what it is. We are in a collective poly crisis. If the term poly crisis is new to you, that is a word that encompasses the fact of the economic, political, cultural, environmental chaos of these times. And it's heavy and it's real. And I want to begin with the vulnerability of saying I'm not okay a lot of the time as I lean into this. And also, I do the distracting and the numbing out and the chop wood, carry water, just like we all do, because those defense mechanisms, those protective strategies, they do serve us to an extent. But if we are stuck behind them all the time, not really going to be the terrain where meaningful change gets to happen, both in our immediate direct experience and in the wider collective. So we're here to explore a particular lens to look through, a way to move, to be with this. And that is through the lens of pleasure activism. Before we get into what that encompasses, I want to speak to you for a moment about this space that you've stepped into. And you're watching this as a replay right now. This applies to you as well, to really just make space within yourself to land softly, to connect to whatever is here, set aside the judgment of thinking that there's a right or wrong way to be feeling, and lean in with curiosity, both about your own self and about what you're hearing here today. And of course, as you're listening, take care of yourself. If you need a pause, if you need a break, if I'm inviting a particular practice that doesn't quite work for you in some way, you're the expert in you, and I encourage you to lean in. Okay, so you're the expert in you, but let me talk a little bit about me as an expert. And for relevant context, I come from a background where once upon a time, in a former chapter of my life, I was a super high achieving corporate ladder climbing, middle class American woman who was very interested in keeping up with the Joneses, maintaining the appearance of upwardly mobile success and status quo. I get it. And what happened for me, blessedly, is that I had just the right amount of restlessness and discontent with that life, and just the right amount of risk tolerance to be willing to leap, to cut ties with that version of my life in pursuit of something that felt more aligned with heart and soul and purpose. And that has what set me on this path of pleasure-centric, erotic wholeness, guidance, transformation, where I teach workshops like this. I give talks. I work one-to-one with my clients. Sometimes I do group programming. There's a lot of different ways it gets to show up. And I am so freaking grateful, truly so grateful. Other things that are relevant to my relationship to that poly crisis and to the stress and the reactivity that a lot of us are contending with is I'm an entrepreneur. And the path of entrepreneurship, anyone who's walking it will tell you, is not for the faint of heart. And what it does require for me, especially given what I teach and what I guide people around, it requires a really high degree of integrity and a rigorous practice of me walking my talk, really doing the things that I am going to share with you here today, woven into my life on a consistent basis, that I have explored the very terrain that I'm pointing you toward is essential. I would burn myself out and I'd be a total hypocrite otherwise. So I just want you to know that that's a piece about where I'm coming from. And another piece is that as someone who has been a spiritual seeker for most of her life, and spent a lot of time in various spiritual communities, namely under the headings of yoga and tantra, I encountered a lot of harm being done there, a lot of spiritual bypassing, a lot of abuses of power. And that is what really lit the fire in me to ensure that the space that I hold brings a culturally sensitive, trauma informed, compassionate lens always. And that really is integral to pleasure activism. So that's a little of the background. Before I go further, I want to talk about the fact that I am a white woman, and I'm going to be making reference today to the specific work and influence of numerous Black women. And Black intersectional feminism is a huge part of the formation that I have received to be able to teach and guide and talk about the things that I'm here to today. Also, a big part of my background is learning through an assortment of more earth based indigenous traditions. And so it is people of color, and so very often women of color, who are the lineage carriers, the wisdom keepers, the medicine women, as it were. And I'm standing here with a lot of humility and gratitude to acknowledge who I've learned from. And it's worth saying, like we can't ignore these parts of how we come by the information that it is that we share and teach. The truth of the matter is there's very little that I'll probably end up saying today that is original, and I'm okay with that. It does not feel like I'm, oh, I don't have enough credibility, or I'm somehow, not presenting myself as expert enough. To the contrary, I feel like it's incredibly important to be humble about who we learn from, and the fact that ultimately it's all of us with our unique voice, or maybe a slightly different perspective, or whatever the degree of relatability that I might be able to establish with you that lets this message get across. That's what matters. So that's what I've got as far as preamble, and let's dive into pleasure activism. All right, so your culture, your choice. What do I mean here? We don't necessarily have a choice about the dominant culture that we are born into and living amongst. And if you are here like I am in the United States of America, our dominant culture is so deeply, deeply rooted in disconnection and disembodiment. And this is true among most so-called, developed modern Western cultures. And what that means, things that are normalized here, is taking direction from an external authority, following and upholding the status quo at all costs. Most of us move around our lives in a state of functional freeze. So we are numb inside and continue with that striving anyway. We perform, we do what has to get done, but it's very, very disembodied. And that can be a really hard space to kind of like hang out and identify, wait a minute, something's not wrong here, because on the outside it looks like it's quote unquote supposed to, but it's not. And then there's the chronic stress, the burnout, the real like fatigue and exhaustion, the chronic health issues that people have, as well as more relational things like a lack of genuine intimacy, both on the emotional level, on the physical level. People are touch starved, people are feeling isolated. And what I want to emphasize here is that instead of taking that on, if you relate to those experiences, if that's part of what you are going through right now, instead of taking that on as some kind of personal failing and thus something you need to solve and fix all by yourself right here and right now, what I want you to hear me say is that these are cultural patterns. These exist in our collective, right? So it's not just like you are the only one holding this. It is something that we get to look at through that culturally sensitive lens. And then, back to the title of this slide, you get to choose. You get to choose whether or not the dominant cultural norms really work for you. Instead, as options, you have a culture of erotic wholeness, my body of work, what I teach. You have a culture of pleasure activism, Adrienne Maree Brown's work that we're going to get into a little bit further, which are rooted in connection and embodiment. Here we center presence, authenticity, communal care, and really more than anything, taking direction from your inner wisdom with the trust that when we are well resourced and regulated and we have healthy relationships, that inner wisdom is going to guide us in directions that ultimately are of a benefit to our collective. These cultures honor the cycles and rhythms of nature, and that includes honoring the cycles and rhythms of our bodies. So we allow for rest, we allow for play, creativity, unstructured time. We prioritize beauty, connection to nature and place, and eating well and exercising and all the things that really sustain us. And relationally, we want emotional intimacy, closeness, attuned intimacy, affection. These are the things that we center. And it is a radical act, a truly, truly radical act of culture tending to honor the erotic beauty, sensuality, creativity, our emotionality, our activism, our dynamism, our relationships. And I invite you to pause for a moment as you're taking this in. You might even pause the recording after you hear. And what I want you to reflect on is both the experiences you have in our dominant culture and everything I described there about functional freeze and stress and burnout, the cultural patterns. And then also, what experiences do you have? In what ways are you embodying a culture of erotic wholeness and pleasure activism? Take a little inventory for yourself. Notice, is the list skewing a little longer in one direction or the other? And this is not even one of those where we want to strive for balance. I'm very biased, but it doesn't mean I'm wrong. That I would invite that list of erotic wholeness and pleasure activism is one that you want to continually grow. And that's what we're going to do today, is give you ways to approach that. Okay. So before I move on with the content, let's take another moment for something more practice oriented. Let's get into our bodies. Let's actually cultivate presence. So taking all of this in, go ahead and I'd like for you to put your body in motion. If you're somewhere that you could stand up and walk around or move around, if you're seated and you can just kind of shift and wiggle in your seat, that's great. But go ahead and give it some movement, maybe even like some really rapid shaking your limbs out, wiggling your whole body, get a little warmth and vibration going. And I'm going to count you down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Finding stillness, taking a pause. And as you do, notice where your attention and awareness goes in your body. Where is there a sensation that you can readily feel? Maybe it's the beating of your heart. Maybe it's a flush of warmth. Maybe there's some tingling in your fingertips or the soles of your feet. Notice the quality of your breath. This is an invitation into presence. Sometimes we need to activate, we need to stir the pot up to make it a little easier to then get still and really notice what we notice. So this is a beautiful way for you to cultivate presence with yourself anytime, anywhere you need it. All right. So erotic wholeness. Let's talk about what this is, especially if you are new here, new to me. Welcome. You're right on time. Erotic wholeness is trauma-informed, culturally sensitive, pleasure-centric, erotic embodiment guidance. And I know that those are a lot of words, but let me talk about some of the particulars and the examples. Things that I believe. We are erotic by nature. So Eros, the reason I use this word, it's a wider understanding that includes our sexuality, but isn't limited to that alone. It's our creativity, it's our artistry, it's our activism, it's how we tend our relationships, it's how we really live our passion into the world. So we are erotic by nature, and each of us on our journey of personal erotic liberation serves our collective liberation. So this includes the work that we do to release the shame and the stigma, the freeze, the blocks, so that we are really able to be available to our true, authentic experience and that of others, to cultivate relationships rooted in presence. We also cultivate our agency, which is to say our power to choose for ourselves, to discern our needs, our wants, our boundaries, and act accordingly. And we make peace with the fact that we have those, that we have desires, that we have boundaries, and we cultivate the skills to learn how to communicate about them in really healthy ways in our relationships. in this wider understanding of what eroticism encompasses, as I've already said, it's about a lot more than our sex. It's also not only about feeling good. Grief, rage, anger, sorrow, this is erotic too. Anything that gets us into deep feeling is erotic. And we recognize that when we resource ourselves, when we are really doing the work to regulate our nervous systems to make sure that we're nourished, that too is a form of activism. And this is really the essence of what pleasure activism is about in so many ways. So I want to introduce you, if you don't already know, the amazing Adrienne Maree Brown. Adrienne Maree Brown's book, Pleasure Activism, which I'm holding up here in this little corner camera, is honestly, it's like a Bible for me. The first time I read this book, and my copy is pretty well worn, it just floored me. I learned so very much through her her way of really inviting us into a deeper understanding of what pleasure can be and what activism can be. And so this quote from her: feeling good is not frivolous. It is a measure of freedom, not just the physical freedom of the body to pursue the pleasure of the flesh, but also the mental, emotional, and spiritual freedom to feel content, happy, and present in our brief and potent lives. Taking those words in, how readily do you agree with this? That would be one question. And then how significantly are you living into this? I think for many of us, there's a gap. We might identify with this in theory, but where and how are we truly putting it into the practice of our lived experience day in and day out? And that is a big part of what we're going to explore today. I'm going to be giving you specific ways that this can become praxis. Before we go there, I want to just talk a little bit about the fact that I mentioned earlier, Black intersectional feminism is a huge movement that has informed so much cultural change in our wider collective. And for me personally, as a guide, as an educator, it really informs a significant piece of how I lead and hold space. And like Adrienne Maree Brown, I cite Audre Lorde as one of my great influences, in particular, her essay, Uses of the Erotic. And this is a brief excerpt from that essay, which, it's worth noting, is not especially long. There are PDFs of it available all online. There's a YouTube video of her narrating it, and it's really worth a read. And this excerpt: as women, we need to examine the ways in which our world can be truly different. I'm speaking here of the necessity for reassessing the quality of all the aspects of our lives and of our work, and of how we move toward and through them. So, an invitation here to really question the status quo, to question the cultural norms, the conditioned beliefs that we have been handed, the things that would have us believe that our worth is always only rooted in our productivity, or that we need to be people pleasers or perfectionists in order to be loved, in order to feel safe. These are cultural imprints that we are carrying. They are not our authentic truths. And so there's this beautiful invitation by Audre Lorde, by Adrienne Maree Brown, by myself, to ask these questions, to really consider, what is my truth and how might I live my life differently if it were in accordance with that? I want to invite you into your body once again, just a little bit more. So we're going to go ahead and rub our hands together, warming the hands up, palms vigorously, vigorously, vigorously. Get a little heat generated there, because sometimes it's a lot for our brains to take all this in, and we want to bring it into the body. And since we're here to talk about pleasure in a pleasurable way, so once you've gotten that heat, go ahead and bring your hands toward your face, toward your neck and throat, maybe your head and scalp, your upper arms, wherever it feels pleasurable, to bring your own touch, to bring a little bit of warmth and connection in. Let the sensations, the weight of your hands, the pressure that you apply really be a source of nourishment for you. And then go ahead and warm the hands once more. Rub, 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 rub. Just get a little motion in the body, letting yourself take this in. And then bring your hands anywhere that feels pleasurable to you. So my hands often want to go to my heart and to my low belly. I find this incredibly grounding, comforting, centering. And as you rest here, wherever your hands have landed, use this as an opportunity to notice what you notice. Thoughts, emotions, sensations. And I'm going to read an extension of the Audre Lorde quote, jumping a little bit ahead in her essay, Uses of the Erotic. This too from Audre. When I speak of the erotic, then, I speak of it as an assertion of the life force of women, of that creative energy empowered, the knowledge and use of which we are now reclaiming in our language, our history, our dancing, our loving, our work, our lives. There it is. Eros, which is the personification of love, a dynamic force, weaves into all these different aspects of our existence. And in this very moment, we get to write new stories, to reclaim old definitions that have been buried under about what is erotic and what is the value of a culture that embraces our erotic nature. So let's talk then about what is a culture. I've used this word a lot, and I think that a lot of us are not entirely clear on what culture means. So things to know about culture: it is learned, which is to say it's passed down generation to generation, through socialization, through an immersion in your group's behaviors, traditions, practices, group being family, being religion, being community, being nation, right? There are different spheres, if you will, that we learn culture through. The other thing about culture is it's shared. It is collective experience of beliefs, practices, and values. So a culture is not just a single person's ideology. It is something that is shared between two or more people, which is why in my work, which focuses on relational intimacy, sexuality, and such, I talk often with my clients about creating the culture of their partnerships, their relationships, their families. And I invite you to consider that too, that you have an opportunity to create the culture of your most treasured relationships in accordance with what you value. Culture relies on symbols. It is symbolic. So our language, our art, our gestures, our clothing, our foods, all of these things convey meaning. It's a way that we recognize others who are part of our culture. We recognize difference, and it's a way of promoting our cultural values. Culture is integrated. So it is to say that these various elements we're speaking of here, they're interconnected and woven together in a cohesive system. It's not enough to just say, oh, I dress like this, that's my culture. Or I think like this, that's my culture. It is the integration of these various elements that really empowers and inspires a culture in a wider way. Culture is adaptive, which is to say that it evolves. It isn't static. It's going to continually change in response to the circumstances and environments that it moves through. And similarly, that dynamism, it changes generation to generation and group to group. So even though we might be born into a religious culture, a political culture, a culture of our state, for instance, or nation, that's going to change over time. And this is a beautiful thing, because we have an opportunity and we have a responsibility then to be tending cultures of care, tending a culture that serves collective liberation. This is what, as I mentioned, Black feminist, Black intersectional feminist movement, earth-based indigenous traditions have long been tending to this quality of culture. And all of us, regardless of what our particular intersections of identity might be, have this opportunity to really join in and create a culture that aligns with our values and really is bringing into being the kind of world that we want to live in. So what are the things that matter to you? What is the cultural change and the things that are important to you to include? What do you want to remember yourself to, which is to say, once again, become a member of a culture that reflects your truth? So here are some things that I certainly care a lot about and that align very much with the idea of pleasure activism: rest and regulation as resistance. I'm going to shout out yet another incredible Black woman. I'm holding up a book here, Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hersey. She is the founder of the NAP Ministry, an amazing resource that's all about the importance, particularly for Black women, but not exclusively so, of resting, taking naps, taking breaks. It isn't a luxury. It isn't something that should just be available for a privileged few. It's essential to our well-being, and it's an act of defiance in a dominant culture that has us believe we've got to operate as if we were robots. Other things to remember ourselves to, other cultural markers: communal care and resource sharing, embracing that we are erotic by nature and that Eros is about more than sex. We honor the cycles and rhythms of our body in the natural world. We measure success by things like joy, peace, and health, not only the money in the bank account or the car we drive or the purse we carry, that type of stuff. We remember ourselves to having reverence for the interconnectedness of all of life, recognizing that we are part of this earth community. It's not a human world and everything else is living in it. We as humans live in a more than human world. And then centering things like art, play, beauty, creativity, sensuality is essential to thriving. And that's really what we are here to get into. I want to invite you to pause taking this list in, noticing what really resonates and aligns for you. And also, what else would you add to this list? What do you value? What would you want your culture of relationship, of community to include so that it really feels like you are getting into alignment with your values? And maybe you look at this list and you're like, oh, I've got all this going on already. Or I aspire to all of this. That's great. That's beautiful. And we've always got further to go. Okay. So I want to invite this inquiry to continue a little bit and center the idea that we get to define pleasure on our own terms, just as we get to define sex on our own terms. That's the conversation that I have all the time as I'm working particularly one-to-one with my clients, where we are given certain culturally conditioned scripts about what sex is, what pleasure is, what success is. And when we step back, really do the work to feel empowered within ourselves, to claim our agency, and to be able to bring a critical lens to ask ourselves, what's authentic for me? You get to answer questions like, what is your measure of pleasure? So again, my list here, I've put these things down because it is what's important to me, and it's not an all-inclusive list, but things like time in nature, loving kindness, fresh, nourishing foods, adornment and expression, space for quiet and contemplation, creative outlets, aesthetic beauty, rest and rejuvenation, sense of belonging, meaningful connection, a well-regulated nervous system, and attuned sensuality and touch. These are all things that qualify on my list of what is pleasurable, how I measure pleasure. What would you add to this list? Or what doesn't quite, resonate for you? Again, what I really, really want you to be doing here is thinking about your truth. If nothing else, pleasure activism stands for a return of our authenticity at the center, as opposed to going along with the status quo. So even as you sit with these kind of inquiries that might seem pretty straightforward, this too is part of the practice. So before we move into some actual practices that I'm going to offer, let's do a little deep breath and an exhale with sound. Do it again. Maybe this time make a different sound. one more time. Oh. So our breath and our sound are really, really helpful. So is our movement and our touch. And if you want to bring a little movement and touch in right now, go on ahead. These are your allies of erotic embodiment: breath, sound, movement, touch, and really leaning into them as resources here to support you is so very important. Okay. I want to introduce us to another AMB quote: pleasure as praxis. And what is praxis, you might ask? What's this funny little word that sounds like practice? It's the distinction between something being purely theoretical and actually put into praxis. So we have talked a lot thus far about cultural change and what constitutes culture and so on and so forth. But if we stopped there, it's just theory, right? How it becomes a culture is when we enact it, when we actually commit to an ongoing practice of these things that we're speaking of. And this from Adrienne Maree Brown: we need to learn how to practice love such that care for ourselves and others is understood as political resistance and cultivating resilience. So again, this is about resourcing ourselves. This is about resourcing one another. This is about doing the work, fighting the good fight, so that the wider world that we live in, our cultures, of our economy, our politics, so on and so forth, reflect the values that we hold dear. Not easy work, not quick work, but we're here for it. We're here for the good fight. Okay, so I'm going to give you some practices and see where you want to take these. I am a big fan of writing, of journaling. And even if that is not your go-to, this practice, if you were going to commit to one thing, is a beautiful one. And it is 9 beautiful things to end each day. So this is a list that you would make, ideally right before you go to bed or as you're in your wind down time, of 3 beautiful experiences you had that day of human behavior. So it could be an exchange or a conversation that you participated in directly. It could be you witnessing a good Samaritan or a small kindness, like someone at the grocery store letting the person behind them with only 2 items jump ahead in the line of their full cart. Something related to human behavior that you can reflect on as beautiful and bring gratitude to. And then 3 things that you experienced as beautiful in your environment or out in nature. This morning, I didn't have a ton of time, but I wanted to move my body. So I took like a 30-minute walk in a park not far from my house. And I saw redwood trees and I saw the creek flowing. So what are the things in your environment? Look around where you are right now. Is it the light coming through the window, or the way your space is decorated, the colors, the textures? And lastly, 3 beautiful things in general that you notice. So this could be anything going on during the day. It could be the song you heard on the radio. It could be something you ate. It could be a beautiful building that you walked past, some clothing that you're like, ooh, that's super stylish. Anything at all. And the whole point here is gratitude and beauty. Infusing yourself with this is scientifically proven to elevate your mood and reduce your stress levels. Okay, I actually extracted this practice in particular through a study done by UC Berkeley, which is just in my backyard here, about the science of feeling good. So paying attention to beauty and actively practicing gratitude are 2 low lift, no cost, simple ways for you to infuse your life with the goodness of the erotic. Again, great thing to do at the end of the day to wind down. And what I would recommend is that commit to this for at least 1 week, every single night for a week, and see what happens. Notice. Me personally, I've been doing a practice like this for going on about a year now, and it's a game changer. I have my dedicated notebook that is just for this. It's right by my bedside. And before I go to bed at night, this is what I do. And if I'm really, really tired, sometimes the list is like very, very succinct, but most of the time I get kind of descriptive with it. And what is really important is when you pay attention as you're doing the recall, as you're conjuring the memory of what it is that you experienced that day, it's as if you're reliving that experience, right? So you're getting more mileage out of it by recalling it, by writing it down, boosting the positive effects and mitigating that stress effect that goes on in the body. All right. Next one, creativity. And I want to share with you another practice called the artist's date, which, if you're familiar with Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, this might be one you've already heard of. And I'll say for context, I've had a story that I've walked around with in life of feeling like I'm not an artist because I'm not necessarily a talented painter or, I don't know, a sculptor or something that results in like a tangible material art. And I started to really challenge this quite a number of years ago. It was, I think, like 2018 that I made a commitment to stop that negative story of not being creative, not being an artist, and begin to explore the things that really did bring me alive. Dancing, I did end up taking a pottery course, writing, singing, just playing with these things, not because I needed to be good at them. It's not about mastery. It's really about the pleasure of it. So artist dates consist of a weekly solo outing, 1 to 2 hours that you spend by yourself, dedicated, protected time for your artist date. And during that time, you want to try something fun, inspiring, or intriguing. Ideally, things that are a bit novel is a great way so that you're learning new capacities, new things you might enjoy. And this is all about filling up your cup, replenishing your creativity excuse me, with experimentation, self-discovery, and really sparking joy in your life. And again, as I already said, this is not about mastery. It's not about productivity. And please don't have it just be about, okay, checkbox, did my artist date only for the sake of getting it done. Let yourself truly embody playfulness, curiosity, experimentation, wonder. These are the things that are going to really help to stoke the creative fire in you. And creativity is fuel for all the roles that we play: your professional life, your activism, showing up as your best self in relationships with the people you care about. So I want to give you a handful or so of ideas for artist dates. And then if this is something that you want to run with even further, come up with your own ideas. Also, quick Google search for artist date ideas. You're going to find a ton of stuff online. Some possibilities. You can go to a craft or an art supply store and just kind of walk around, touch things, see what really calls to you. Maybe you purchase something. Maybe it's just the shopping trip. Going out to a park, it could be a playground. I love doing this. Get on the swings, go on the monkey bars, do something that you might have done when you were a kid but haven't done in a long time just for the fun of it. Or it doesn't have to necessarily be a playground. It could be anywhere that you can wander around, whether that's a city park or something that is more nature or less human. Go to a cafe or a lounge or a coffee shop that's new to you and treat yourself to a little something. Sit there, soak in the ambient environment. Do not go on your phone. Similarly, going to a museum exhibit or a show or a talk could be wonderful. Walking through a neighborhood that's unfamiliar to you is an idea. If it's like a rainy day or you want to just do something that's at home that's easy, you could rearrange your books. Maybe you want to put them in color order or subject order or do something different, and have that also be a chance to purge, to pass on things that are no longer resonant. You could do the same thing with the clothes in your closet, or if you have art and craft supplies at home, spend a little time just refreshing, revitalizing, releasing what doesn't serve, and beautifying what's already there. If you want another thing to do at home, read poetry out loud to yourself. Put some poetry books, on your library checkout list, or grab them off the bookshelf if you've got them. Do an online search ahead of time and let yourself really be inspired by the poetry washing over you. Something that can be a fun, like inexpensive outing: go to a thrift shop and try some things out. Maybe even buy yourself something that is a departure from your typical style, not your usual aesthetic, and see what it feels like to maybe step into a different persona. And this one, I'm going to keep it on brand for me, visiting a sex shop and checking out the selection, the toys, the tools, the accoutrements, and ideally going to a shop where they really care to offer great customer service and are available to answer your questions can be so helpful. That way you get to learn some things and maybe you decide to take a new toy home. So those are some possibilities for an artist state. And then the last thing I want to give you as far as a practice that gets to be something you live into, so that pleasure activism and erotic wholeness are not only theoretical for you, they're part of how you move through your day-to-day life. This is the anti-agenda intimacy agenda. Okay, so whether or not you choose to explore this individually or with a partner, this is a practice that is all about connecting to your sensuality, possibly your sexuality, but doing so in a way that is really not goal oriented. So, what I want you to do, dedicate a time, decide on a place, and get the environment set up to your liking. That means the sounds, the smells, the light, the temperature, like really set the space with care so that it feels easy to be in. And then I already mentioned these to you, but I'm going to highlight them again. Your 4 allies of erotic embodiment. They are breath, sound, movement, and touch. The reason I call these your allies is because they are here to help you. They help you to settle yourself down. They help you to relax. When you are relaxed, you become more receptive and you want to be able to take in your experience in a non goal oriented way. What that means is this is not about your typical masturbation pattern. This is not about your typical choreography of partnered sex. We're not trying to reach an orgasm or any other goal beyond getting really present and curious with ourselves. So that means slow down, experiment, follow your impulses, follow your curiosity. Honor if you come up against a boundary or something doesn't feel good, pivot into a new direction. Explore things that are novel, play with different sensations, different qualities of touch. I often recommend to people that, heading to your linen closet, your regular closet, and or your kitchen, you're going to come up with lots of different sensation toys. So that could be an ice cube, that could be a fork, that could be a wooden spatula, a silk scarf, a fluffy sweater, things like that you can play with on the surface of your skin. You can do that solo, or if you're with a lover, you can do this for each other. Play and explore with things that might be new simply for the sake of the exploration. You're going to learn more about what feels good. And if you come across something that you're not super into, okay, so be it. That's fine. There's no way to do this wrong. It's all about, really, as I said, slowing down to the pace of presence and allowing for a sensual experience that isn't all about trying to reach a goal. So again, we've got the writing practice, the artist state, and the anti-agenda intimacy agenda as 3 things that you could be incorporating into your life right now to increase the amount of pleasure and well-being and appreciation for beauty and sensuality and eros and goodness in your life. This is essential. It's essential to your thriving, to your personal liberation, and we are here in service ultimately to collective liberation. So let's talk about that. Beyond our pleasure, activism takes many different forms. And so I've put together a list here of some ways to put that loving goodness into action. Once again, probably not an exhaustive list by a long shot, but it does cover a lot. And so I want to talk these through and invite you to consider what you want to commit to. Maybe you're doing some of this already, and we can always make room for a little bit more, knowing that activism can look so many different ways, and we get to honor our capacities, our needs, our boundaries, while still committing to showing up. So, one form of activism is simply leveraging your privilege in whatever way you can to protect the most vulnerable people among you. One of the ways that we see this showing up a lot at the present time is we've got ICE raids happening, and we see citizens who are showing up and putting their bodies on the line saying, you are not welcome here. You are not allowed. This is illegal. You cannot touch this person, so on and so forth. That is something that many of us may or have an opportunity to do. And it's a beautiful way, not the only way, but a really important way that our privilege can be put into positive action in service and in protection of those more vulnerable in ourselves. Attending protest marches and rallies, it does matter. Critical mass, also, I could say from my direct experience, and it's different for everybody, but for me, it's felt so heartening to be among a crowd of people. And I'm usually an introvert who doesn't love crowds, but occasionally, to know that there is that much solidarity and there are all of these people who are standing up for the things that align with my values, it's a tremendous lift, a big boost when we're feeling kind of hopeless and despairing of these times. You can support grassroots movements through any number of other ways, signing petitions, sharing those, using your social media and community platforms to spread the word about the work that's being done by these organizations and movements, about political action that needs to get taken. Art as activism is certainly a really valuable thing, especially for those of you who have the artistic talents that I mentioned, feeling frustrated I didn't have, but creating art that directly communicates the messages and the values that align with the cultural change that you care about. All of us have an opportunity to vote with our dollars. So if you're not already familiar with the boycott, divest, and sanction movement, BDS, check that out. It'll tell you what brands are behaving in really problematic and unethical ways that you might not want to support. And really supporting local, shopping local is always going to be our best option when we have it. Donating money, goods, and services to aligned causes, or simply to keep a flow of more shared resource going in your immediate community, as opposed to everything having to be newly acquired. Participating in politics, local, state, and federal. So that could look like showing up to city council meetings. It could look like contacting your representatives, which that next one there, contact your elected officials. A great resource for that is 5calls, number 5, the numeral 5calls.org, which will put you in direct contact with your officials based upon where you live. It will give you scripts for the particular topics that you want to address. And it matters. Again, we need critical mass. Other things to do, it would be to create or contribute to mutual aid efforts. So this is where there is a sharing of resources rather than relying upon institutions, whether those are nonprofits or government or what have you. It's when individuals rally around and get money or goods or childcare or an emergency place to stay or whatever is needed, meal trains, organizing mutual aid in those ways so that we really are supporting one another and tending the culture we care about. And if you're somebody who has the opportunity and the skill to engage in debates and conversation across divides, that is a huge one. We need it. And I'm going to be honest when I say I'm not always the best at it, right? I can be a fiery one, but it is important to learn how to engage in nonviolent communication, to have healthy debate. This is something that we know is central to the democratic process, and to the extent that we're able to live that into existence, if it aligns with our cultural values, then that's a beautiful way to put your love into action. So again, here is a list of many, many ways that your pleasure can then lead to activism that is impacting our wider collective. So this is what it means when we say personal liberation in service to collective liberation. My invitation to you is find 1, 2, 3 things on this list, and if you can sustainably do more, great, but at least make a commitment to something that is not already going on for you. So if you are not already contacting your elected officials, go download the 5calls app and start doing that. Ideally on a daily basis. Do it once a week if that's what you can do. If you're not already leveraging your community platforms and talking to the people that you have access to, maybe you think about that. Any action that you can take in service to creating the culture that aligns with your values, with these values we've spoken of here today, that is what this is all about. So, in closing, what I want to share a little bit about here is that if you are somebody who wants to be in more active community space, if you want to be surrounded by others who are focusing on the pleasure and the goodness to really get beautifully resourced so that we can then turn it around and live our purpose in the most aligned ways, I have a retreat happening December 5th through 7th called Radical Rejuvenation. And this is a deep diving 3-day, 2-night weekend where we're going to have a chance to reset, to fuel our passions. An amazing chef is going to be catering organic meals. We'll be exploring out in beautiful nature, lots of time for relaxation and different somatic practices and conversations. So it's a small retreat. We've got space for only 10 people maximum. If you are interested, please check it out and let's chat so that we can make sure to reserve your space. And I will send you off with my gratitude for you. If you do have questions, if those of you who are watching this via replay, you could always shoot an email or send a message through the website. I'm so happy to talk to you about anything that you want to talk to. And please know that I am cheering for you, rooting for you, and here in service to you and your erotic wholeness. Thank you so much for being here.